the genre has exploded compared to where it was, particularly post-COVID. But then because it's viewed on the screen, on a very small screen, it becomes much more about the aesthetic. So just to give you an example, if I post a photo that has a more simple aesthetic but is punchy in terms of color and composition and subject matter, that will get a lot more likes than, say, something that is much more complex and detailed, and I think is much harder to capture. That won't get as many likes because people pass over it. They just want to see that punchy, funny, popping photo. Yeah. So in that sense, it's not the medium for detailed street photos, which is unfortunate because for me, they're the more interesting.
So, welcome back, everybody, to a new episode of Eyeshot 50 millimeters. And today we're sitting down with Julia Coddington, an Australian photographer and a member of Women Street Photographer, whose work captures the intensity and depth of humanity in everyday life and streets. Julia, thank you so much for being with us, and welcome.
And thank you, Lucrecia and Marco and the Eyeshot team for inviting me. It's certainly a great honor, and I'm delighted that you asked me. So thank you.
Thank you. And for everybody who's watching, just a little reminder to keep liking, keep subscribing, and keep commenting, because with just one small click to you, it means the world for us for supporting independent street and documentary photography. So, Julia, let's actually start immediately with the very first question, which is, who is instead Julia Coddington, according to Julia Coddington?
Okay. So I guess I'm the product of my life experiences. I'm now in my 60s, so getting up there. I'm a mum of 3 kids. I have a grandkid. I have a lovely partner, Jerry Orkin. I live in a beautiful place by the beach. And I guess when I say that I'm a product of my life experiences, I've had a very full life. I've lived in various different places. As a kid, I grew up in the country, in the rural area, like almost the outback area of Australia. I had that freedom as a kid. I went to boarding school for 6 years. So after having the freedom of being, having a free childhood and then going to boarding school, that was like getting trapped. But then after that, I went to university, traveled a lot. Then I got married early, had three children. We lived in various different places, and it goes on from there. So yeah, it's been a very full life.
That's nice. You've grown up in Australia in a very, let's say, beautiful place with open spaces, strong light, and very beautiful colors. So my question is, do you think that your background, I mean, you've already answered, but I want to dive deeper into this. Your background has in some way influenced your photographic vision or your photographic approach somehow?
I think it has. I think being Australian we're a little bit unique, where Australians are stuck a long way away from everywhere else. We have a particularly unique culture that is quite different. It's not British, it's not European. We've developed this unique culture, and I think that is reflected a lot in the work of the photographers here. And particularly strong is the sense of environment here. We have a unique environment in Australia, and yes, we have that brilliant light. It can be a very harsh light, but it is a very unique light. And I think most Australian photographers use that unique light to give our photography a very distinct look. So I guess my photography has been influenced a lot by the Australian environment, and also a lot by, as I said, my life experiences in growing up in this country as well.
Okay. And do you remember the very first moment when you realized that photography was a thing for you? Like, was there a specific event or something that occurred that made you realize, yes, this is the way, the language I want to use to express myself?
Think photography's always been a part of my life, even from, as a kid. I used to take photos of the family events. I had a little Kodak Instamatic camera and a Polaroid camera. And I remember on the Kodak Instamatic, we had those little bulbs that you put on top for the flashes. And I remember the joy of taking the roll of film to the chemist and waiting to the pharmacy and waiting for that roll of film to come back, which usually took about 2 weeks. And it was like a unique gift, a surprise gift, taking the photos out of the little envelope and having a look at what you captured on that little Kodak Instamatics. I think that joy, the surprise gift that photography brought me then has been like that all the way through my life. And photography, as I said, from having a little camera as a kid, and then traveling as a young adult, doing travel type photography with I had a Olympus OM10, I think. And then when I had kids, taking photos of them with a little point and shoot camera. I always had a camera all the way through. But in terms of realizing that I had a particular and unique way of photographing, that really didn't come until quite late. I think probably in the late 2000s. So my son was a teenager then, and he was experimenting with photography and borrowed my DSLR at the time and started taking photos with that. And that then inspired me to pick it up again and take more photos. And then I got an iPhone in 2008, and I started taking photos of people candidly. I've always been curious about taking photos of people, and I've always loved to take photos of people. But with the iPhone, I realized that I could take photos secretly without them knowing, candid photos, and sometimes quite quirky, funny photos. So it was the iPhone. And then I also met my current partner, Jerry Orkin, in the late 2000s. And he was a photographer since he left school, really, in the 1980s, 1990s, he was a photographer. And then he stopped being a photographer for a while, but he then picked it up again. And we both picked it up again around the same time. And we started traveling and taking photos. And then around 2011, I think, we were in Vienna and we saw an Elliot Erwitt exhibition. And it suddenly clicked then that there was this genre of photography called street photography, and it was all about taking photos of people. And I finally realized that, oh yes, that's the type of photography that I like. So yeah, I think I got a bit off the question of the answer there, but
That was, I guess, the best way to term the decisive moment for you in a way to find like a genre where you could fit.
yeah, there was no particular decisive moment where I realized, except around street photography. It was that Elliot Erwitt exhibition where I realized that there was a particular genre called street photography.
And were there any other photographers or visual artists or from other forms of arts that have had an influence on you and on your photography that you could recall, that you maybe also taste changes over times as well? So what were your inspirations?
Art has always been an inspiration because I did art as a subject in high school. So that's always been there in the back of my mind, and particular artists, for example, Rembrandt really stays with me. I think also I studied design, landscape architecture, and there was a design component with that. And I was always much better with the design side of landscape architecture. That was my strength. So it's that the art background and the design background, I think, has really had an influence on my photography as well. That's always there, always stays with me. Yes.
Okay, very, very interesting because you've described, correct me if I'm wrong, you've described your street photography almost as a form of addiction some ways, right? So what does it give it to you compared to other forms of art or such as architectural design or from your background? What is it that for you, what is it that photography gives you?
It gives me I It gives me a buzz. So it excites me much, much more than any other form of art, I guess. And that's what I practice at the moment, is photography. So of course that's the thing that gives me great joy. But it's also, for me, the type of photography that I practice is one that I just fully embrace it. When I do take photos, I fully embrace it. I get kind of really sucked into it. It's like a mindfulness, very much a mindfulness process for me, the process of taking photos, because it's not just about taking a photo of a person, it's also about becoming integrated into that scene that I'm taking a photo of. It's about melding into the scene rather than standing back from it. And that's where I get the buzz from, is getting up really close to people, integrating into the scene and becoming part of that scene. So a lot of street photographers stand back from the scene and observe from a distance, whereas I think the way I photograph is to become part of that scene because I get right into it and get very close to it. And that is what gives me the buzz. That's what's exciting for me. Is that it's about sort of capturing those really intimate moments, and um it's really hard to explain, but it's that intimacy for me as the photographer within the scene, if that makes sense.
Totally makes sense. And when you enter the scenes, when you enter intimate moments, are there any recurring elements or elements that attracts you particularly that you have noticed that really draws you to the scene and be like, okay, I want to go in it and shoot this moment? How's the process for you? Or is just pure instinct and there's no, of course, fixed rule, but how does it work for you?
It's uh it's it is a process. So I'll start from the outside and wander around and get a feel for what's happening before I start sort of moving in. And it's so observation. And then what attracts me usually is, people's faces, people's hands, the expression on their faces, the interaction between the people. And what I want to do is capture that interaction without interrupting it, without breaking that up. So I have to go in sort of carefully and slowly in order to integrate into that scene so that I can capture those moments between the people.
In your work, color is also a very important element, I feel. looking at your photographs, it becomes structure, tension, but also emotions. Somehow it's used to give these feelings to who's watching it. When did you realize that color was your central language rather than, for instance, black and white?
I started off shooting in black and white early on, like I think a lot of people do. But then when I started taking photos, mostly down at the pool, actually, the ocean pool, which is just near close to where I live. And once I was I realized that we have such brilliant light here that I wanted to capture that light. And you can't do that in black and white. You have to capture that in color. And then it just became all color. That said, I do still play around with black and white. I just don't really share any of that, but I do often convert particular photos to black and white just to see how they look. The ones that I think might look more, yeah, a little better in black and white, I'll convert them and just see.
How it looks like. Okay, but you're very much drawn to color, as we'll see us. Yeah.
Attracted to color.
Yes. Also, your photographs, I feel like you have an approach to photography where some of your photographs are very dense, almost overwhelming with elements, but some of them are also very minimal, if I can say that. How do you balance these two sides, and how do they coexist in your work, if that makes sense?
Yeah. So I think I'm moving to more towards the more chaotic, denser, crowded frame look because that's what interests me most and I find that more challenging. So my earlier work was more simple and more graphic. I still do that, but I don't find that as quite as challenging as the fuller framed work, and that's probably um, what I'm more focused on doing now. I'm building up a body of work around that sort of fuller, crowded frame.
And when you compose the frames, do you think first in terms of energy or form within the viewfinder, the rectangle that you can see? How does it work?
I think form is the more important thing initially. So it's very much a fluid thing for me. So I'm always looking through the frame for the composition. So composition is always here, and it's even though there's all this stuff happening, I want to order it. So it's ordering the chaos basically through composition, through layering.
Okay, so if you would have to rank, for instance, composition, light, and subject, what would come then first for you in terms of like, yeah, ranking? That's tough. I know. It always puts photographer in a, "Ah, I don't know everything."
So I always look for the light first. And whenever I'm photographing, I always look for the light first. And then I look for what's happening, the subject matter, what I'm going to put in the frame. And then I think about composition. So yes, I mean in that order it would be light, subject, composition.
Like that. Interesting.
For me that's the logical order.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. That's the most interesting part about photographers and photography. Everybody has their own approach to it.
Yeah, but it's sort of in some ways it all comes together all at once. Like it's not this and then this and then this. It's kind of it all merges all of a sudden and very quickly.
And then you should. That's the brilliant moment, of course, of course. And just like a final question on this, let's say, mm, on photography gears and like techniques, I wanted to ask you a little bit about post production. How is your approach to post production? Do you try to keep your photos as raw as possible? What's your opinion on it as well?
I'm very lazy when it comes to post-production, so I want to minimize that as much as possible. So the aim is to get it all in camera and then try and get it right in camera. But I will do some post-processing, lighten faces a little bit, darken some areas, whatever needs to be done. And then I'll apply a particular profile. So I have a particular profile that I use just to maintain consistency through my work.
That's interesting. That's interesting. Now I want to instead change gears a little bit, and I want to discuss something that it's very important for both of us as well, and for it should be important for everybody. And it's women representation in the field of photography, which is a very big topic of debate. And I think you're the one of the best person I can talk to about this, because you've apart from working together, you've also played an important role in advocating for more women street photographer and their presence in the field. So my very first question is, in your view, what is that is still not working within this environment?
I think that even though there are many, many more women photographing now, I think the recognition of women's work as being of value still isn't up there. So it's not seen as having the same value as the work of men. And it's not just men that are undervaluing women's work. It's women. It's everybody who is undervaluing women's work. And it's a whole of society issue. It's not just photography. Women's work has always been undervalued, whatever we do. So, that I think it is changing, but it's changing very, very slowly. Um, and it's just women work really hard. I think they have to work a lot harder to get recognition.
Absolutely. So true. And have you ever felt that your work was interpreted differently because of your gender roles and the stigmatizations that sometimes we carry with us?
I'm sure it has. There's no doubt that it has. I think my work is now well recognized. Lots of people seem to like it. Uh, and from the feedback that I that I get. But yeah, I still don't feel as though I get that same recognition that I would probably get if I was a man. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's a structural, societal, as you were saying before, issue. You're also a member of Women's Street Photographer, which is a very big collective and very well recognized. And what I wanted to ask you is, what has being part of such a collective given you and your photography? Do you think it can help, of course, spread the world and be part of something bigger? But what has given personally to you, if you may share?
Okay. So there are various different women's groups. So there's a group called Women's Street Photographers that's run by Gulnara. There's Women in Street, which was founded by Casey Meshbesher, who's based in the US. And Women in Street, I've been part of that, probably since early 2017. And then I'm also part of the Unexposed Collective, which I founded along with my friend Rebecca Wiltshire. So I'm most active in Women in Street and the Unexposed Collective. It's been both of all three of those groups have been really influential for most women. And now there are so many other groups popping up. There are a bunch of Women in Street regional groups. So Women in Street Italy, Women in Street Turkey, Women in Street Japan, Women in Street Taiwan, Women in Street UAE, Women in Street Singapore. And now there's Women in Street Bulgaria, and Women in Street France has just popped up. And then there's a bunch of women-only groups that have all popped up since, I think Women Street Photographers and Unexposed were kind of the first Instagram-based ones, and all of the other groups have kind of popped up since, and they've been really important for women and the growth of women's work. And, I credit people like Casey and Gulnara for promoting women's work through those groups. And yes, I've had a bit of a part in that as well. And I will continue to have a part. I'm actually about to pull back a little bit from Women in Street because I need to focus more on my work. I just need to sort of dedicate a little bit more time to me and my work. Yeah.
Of course. And when it comes to collectives, you have great experiences we were seeing right now, or collectives, or let's say the dedicated platforms in that sense. There are some people that argue that they are necessary, while others argue that there might be the risk of separating more. How would you respond to this criticism, or this, to this criticism, I would call it?
I understand the criticism that, that it's been said that the women-only groups become they become isolated, but I don't think that's the case. I think they provide women with a safe haven to share their work, to explore their work. Their women are much kinder to each other in terms of their criticism and their feedback. Women feel safe in those groups. And I think once they gain confidence being in those groups, then they feel more confident about moving into, non-gendered groups. I think they're really important in giving women a sense of confidence.
And would you say also a sense of belonging, or like more of a confidence?
Yeah, I think a sense of belonging as well. I don't think I would call them collectives as such. We called Unexposed Collective a collective kind of, it's kind of tongue in cheek. It's kind of an anti-collective almost, because everybody could join it. So I think they've been really beneficial, and I think women have really appreciated those spaces.
Okay. And what responsibility does a photographer have today if she wants not only to take photograph or produce images, but also to change the context within those images are circulating?
Well, it goes back to what I was saying before. So women, once they feel confident sharing their work in all women's groups, then they feel more confident about, submitting to Eyeshot publications or competitions, or once they get the recognition. And it's not just, most women don't just share their work within those groups. They also share their work in other groups. And it's not, I wouldn't call it a responsibility. I think it's more feeling as though they are ready to share their work and put their work out there.
Yeah, that's what I was looking for, actually. Yes, it's not responsibility, but yes, as you were saying, I feel like we have to speak up. We have to be strong together. We have to enter the field with certain values in a way, or like with certain ideas, to get the recognition we deserve. I hope we got it right as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think men are much better at being assertive about their work and pushing their work. They're much better at selling themselves. it's all tied into the difference between men and women. Men have always been taught to, things are much more competitive for men in that manosphere. They're much more competitive with each other. They feel as though it's their right to, to push their work forward. They don't have a problem with pushing their work forward for advertising themselves, their work, whereas women aren't very good at doing that. We're much less confident. Um, I've experienced situations I've where I've pushed my work forward, where I've been more pushy and assertive, and I've been kind of smacked down for that, for being too assertive, for my, stepping out of my boundaries kind of thing. So it's is really tricky for women to push themselves forward. And it's not just men who criticize women for doing that. It's other women who criticize women for doing that, for being too pushy.
Yeah, that's totally true. It's not just a men problem, it's everybody's problem. I want to now still stay on the topic of street photography, but I want to discuss a little bit of the most, let's say, hot takes in street photography that are also more emerging lately. So I will give you the very first thing I want to do is giving you, let's say, a brutal statement in that sense. And I wanted to know what you think of it. So I would say that today, too much street photography is aesthetic without consent. Would you agree with that?
Aesthetic without consent.
Yeah, just aesthetic without consent. Street photography has this issue or debate where privacy and consent is something that changes, first of all, from country to country in terms of laws, in terms of everything. But it gets too much this aesthetic feeling without really having consent. That's why I'm saying it's brutal and it's like maybe debatable. What do you think of it? Do you agree? How do you position yourself?
So when you say it's just aesthetic, so you're comparing it to, say, documentary photography?
Or not really, but just about in terms of like the final product, that it's more like it needs to be aesthetically pleasing without maybe thinking of consent and privacy of the subject or the moments, just to get the perfect shot.
Well, it has to be aesthetic in terms of Instagram likes and, what's going to get liked on Instagram. So that aesthetic is very important in that respect. In terms of consent, I mean, street photography for me is about candid photography, so taking photos without permission. And yes, rules vary country to country. So it is difficult. Most street photography isn't used for advertising. It it isn't such a problem for most street photographers because not a lot of street photography is used to promote things. Um, so I mean, street photography is it's quite private in some respects because it's not like it's not commercial photography. It's not documentary because it doesn't tell a particular story um, about a particular project. It can be um, used for that, but with street photography is very much one-off image. It's all about the one-off image. In terms of consent, I think street photographers need to be sensitive about the types of photos that they're taking if they're not asking for consent. So you need to be respectful of your subject matter so that you're not, you know, again, it depends very much on the situation that you're in. I mean, of course, if you're in a drunken environment with people going crazy and it's a fun type of environment, then you can take funny photos and that's okay. But if you take a photo that is in is you know putting a person um, on on display in an awkward or difficult situation. That's not good. But I think, the community on Instagram or on social media, very good at policing that sort of thing anyway. So people are quite careful about what they're posting in terms of how people are represented.
Correct, correct. And you said something before that made me think about another question I wanted to ask you, still in this field, because many argue that documentary photography is information and street photography is simply art. Do you agree with that? Or street photography can also tell stories or documenting moments?
Very much so. I think street photography can document moments, and it can do it, as I said, in a single image by telling the stories within that image. In that sense, it's a little bit like photojournalism because you want to get the story in one image. But there are it crosses over street photography and documentary photography and photojournalism all cross over in many respects. So I think, Graciela was talking about this also. She crosses over. She was a photojournalist, right? So she easily crosses over from being a photojournalist and documentary photographer and street photography. So she's able to be fluid in that respect. The project that I do at the pool is it's street style candid photography, but it's also documentary because it's documented a place over a period of time. So street photography can also document places over a period of time, and that in that sense becomes more documentary as well.
Okay, perfect. That's exactly with Graciela. We talked about this as well, and she was saying the same things basically. So I'm glad to hear this. And we with the advent of the digital social media and everything, Instagram, we're talking a little bit about this before. Do you think Instagram has helped street photography or has it made more superficial?
Both. It's helped it. It's helped, and it's helped spread the street photography love. The genre has exploded compared to where it was, particularly post-COVID. But then because it's viewed on the screen, on a very small screen, as I was saying before, it becomes much more about the aesthetic. So just to give you an example, if I post a photo that has a more simple aesthetic but is punchy in terms of color and composition and subject matter, that will get a lot more likes than, say, something that is much more complex and detailed, and I think is much harder to capture. That won't get as many likes because people pass over it. They just want to see that punchy, funny,
Popping.
popping photo. Yeah. So in that sense, it's not the medium for detailed street photos, which is unfortunate because for me, they're the more interesting ones.
Okay. The next question I have still connects a bit on privacy, consent, and everything, because people often talk about freedom in street photography, but freedom for whom? For the photographer itself, herself, himself, or also for the person being photographed?
In some ways, it's quite a selfish pursuit. But, that said, a lot of photography is. Documentary photography is. You could say that about documentary photography. You could say it about photojournalism. It is about capturing what the photographer wants to capture. It's it's the photographer's self-interest. But you can always also switch that around. If you then take photos of people through time, those photos then become a valuable asset because they do capture particular moments in time and they appreciate and value. So, for example, if you go to an exhibition of photographs from, the 1940s, of street photography from the 1940s all the way to current contemporary times, you then appreciate what a street photographer has done by looking at those photos and appreciating it. And even people who've had their photos taken in the street might then realize the value of that work and the value of what we do. So, yes, it is selfish in some respects, but it also it does have some value. The pursuit of street photography does have some value. I like to think that it does.
Absolutely. It definitely does. Some say that to stand out in photography, in street photography, a photographer's style must always be recognizable. Have you ever felt like you were repeating yourself or becoming stagnant? Feel that's the word.
At times I do, but we all repeat ourselves because it's the pursuit of perfection. It's the pursuit of capturing that decisive or perfect moment. Of course, you repeat yourself, thousands and thousands of times to get that moment. It's all about repetition. But I also very much have found that through that repetition, I have evolved over time. So I was saying before, I preferred doing, making images that were strongly aesthetic, whereas now it's much more about complexity, capturing images that are much more complex and detailed and full. And that's what I love to do now.
Yeah, evolving, repeating, growing from one's nature for sure. And is there anything in today's, let's say, street photography world that you find exaggerated, hypocritical, or overrated that you cannot stand at all?
I like to not be judgmental, and I think photographers take photos for their own enjoyment, and they're posting photos for their pleasure and their enjoyment, and that's what the important thing is. There are photos that I don't like, there are photos that I like, but the important thing is that that particular photographer who's taking those photos is getting pleasure and enjoyment out of them. And it doesn't matter whether I think it's aesthetically pleasing or it's a good photo, it's what that particular photographer gets out of that and the pleasure that it gives them.
On the contrary, do you think or do you feel there is something that is still underestimated or poorly photographed today that might instead be should receive more attention at the same time?
I guess more detailed, like I was talking about before, the more detailed shots, the more detailed photos that we take, the more complex ones, they can only really be appreciated on platforms like Flickr or in exhibitions or publications. They're not really appreciated on Instagram so much, but it's just, repeating what I was talking about before.
Yeah, as kids of algorithms, let's say like that, we tend, as we were saying, this popping colors, something, so the complexity. I guess maybe I always feel like with the advent, and I'm also part of that generation, of course, with the advent of social media and everything, the attention span has also very much lowered. so drastically. So people just like scroll, and whatever. It's such a small screen as well with this photographs that you don't have the sense of like stopping and look for details or analyzing what you're looking for, and just the fastest things that we can understand, then it's fine. And then we go on to the next one.
Yeah, that's correct. And I think that's why, um, Eyeshot, for example, is what you're doing is fantastic because you're making publications that are more accessible than a lot of other publications of street work, documentary work, that makes it more accessible, and having exhibitions. That said, it's expensive, so it's only accessible to some people. And the ideal in the ideal world, we could all publish our work and print our work and have exhibitions of our work, but not all of us have a lot of money to spend. It's sort of, most of us, unfortunately, are limited to social media platforms.
And if you would have to give one piece of advice to a young woman photographer that wants to jump into the world, what would it be? Or what would you have loved to hear when you started as well?
I think just try and build your confidence. And the only way to do that is to get out there and photograph as much as you can initially until you become comfortable and confident, particularly when you're photographing on the street, and also to go out with other people's, because when you're photographing with other people, have other people around, you build your confidence levels because there are other people in the vicinity. So that just joining groups online, having discussions about your work, making friends with other photographers, just looking at photo books, going to exhibitions, just the usual thing that you would say. But I think building your confidence is the crucial thing.
Okay, perfect. Julia, thank you so much for this beautiful talk. I think we touched upon some very, very, very interesting points that not usually people hear. So I'm so, so glad that we found the time to talk to each other, no matter the distance and the time zone,
Great distance.
the great distance. And I thank you once again. And I hope I made you feel comfortable as much as you made me feel comfortable.
Yes, you did very much so. Thank you. And thank you again for the opportunity to chat with you.
Absolutely. And maybe one day we'll see each other face to face. That would be
I hope so.
incredible.
I
Either
hope
here
so.
or in Australia. We'll see.
Yeah, come to Australia. That's what everybody says. Oh, I can't afford to come to Australia. It's too far. The flight is too long. But then we have to get on those long flights and come over there. So if we can do it, you can do it too.
Absolutely so. And we'll definitely do it one day. So, Julia, thank you again for being with us, and for a little message before we go. For everybody who's watching, just keep liking and keep subscribing, because it really means the world for us. And we can continue to bring you this exclusive content on street and documentary photography. And don't forget that now we have also all our podcasts available on all major platforms, and you can find us there on Spotify, Amazon Music, Deezer, and Apple Podcast. So thank you again, everybody, and see you next time.